Okay, Chapter 13, Human Resource Management. And at the Fire Officer 2 level, and even at the Fire Officer 1 level, this is a very complex job or task. And the case study on page 371 points out some very key facts that new company officers come to realize in their position. So when you're looking at the case history here, they talk about the scenario where you have this new captain, you have your fire crew, they're playing jokes, which we all know in the fire service is common practice. It shouldn't be to a point, but you get a group of firemen together and they got some free time on their hands and they're gonna, play jokes on one another. And during this evolution, this joke piece of equipment gets damaged, they play a joke on somebody. Thank goodness, in the scenario, no one gets hurt, which brings up a whole nother level we'll talk about later on in the chapter. But as new captain, the crew obviously is going to see what's going to happen in terms of how you are going to handle this situation. And this is kind of just like the school kids with the teacher. They're going to see how far they can push and what they can get away with without having any repercussions or, children and certain parents or family members. They see, how far can I stretch the leash till I get, yanked in and pulled back. So looking at this scenario, they alluded to a hazmat incident, which is a good analogy. When you're doling out discipline, it should not be something that is spur of the moment or quick. It should be something that you take time, you gather all the facts, you figure out what's going on, you research the appropriate policy and procedure that was violated, and you look at the disciplinary actions. And after you get all your facts together, you write up your recommendation, and then, of course, in the scenario, they send it up to the battalion chief or the next higher rank, and get it approved and tweaked, and then they dole out the discipline. And in this case, if this is something that you're not trained to do or familiar with, it never hurts to ask for opinion from another um, officer, one of equal or greater rank, and advice on how to handle this aspect. Um, Once you dole out the discipline, then they kind of have an idea, your crew, your group, on, hey, he's not going to let us cut up or where the case may be. And you can always start rigid or very hard as a supervisor and then kind of ease off over time, but you can't go the other way around. And I agree, there's a time and place for, certain cut ups and to have a good time, but in other times there's not. But it's very difficult to start out very laissez-faire, easygoing, and then turn into, excuse the expression, a hard case in terms of discipline. The group dynamics just don't work well. Now, other things that you look at in terms of a new captain is you may have to do evaluations, and that is something that is just, excuse me, from my personal experience, a pain in the butt. Like they said here, you have all these criterias, and a lot of times evaluations are more geared toward, Monday through Friday, 40-hour a week office type employees, and not really the fire service. But in order to justify something other than meet standards or doesn't meet standards, you're going to need to come up with a system or a way to document throughout the year these key components, because you're not going to be able to justify anything higher than meets average or doesn't meet average unless you have some facts and figures to go with it. So you need to take notes, keep up on each of your people, and do, of course, your periodic evaluation. So at the end of the year, when these evaluations do come due, you actually have something to put on paper as opposed to meet standard, meet standards, meet standards, or doesn't meet standards, and they ask why, and you go, well, because you have to have justification, and that's with anything in this day and age. And you can't expect to be sitting there in front of your computer and try to fill these things out and recall everything that has happened in the past year on each individual employee. Now, there are other certain tasks and dynamics that you may be tasked with in terms of budgeting and ordering and station supplies and things of that nature. So as you see, when we go through this Fire Officer 2's class, you're going to have other jobs and tasks that may be delegated to you, because a lot of times budgets get lean and positions get cut, so they start requesting more out of the line officers because you just don't have that help in administration. And in your final project for this class, if you haven't already thought about it, you need to go ahead and start thinking about it and doing some research on it. I want you to put together a capital presentation that has a ultra high pressure, well, for this semester, an ultra high pressure firefighting system that I want you to make a pitch to the commissioners or city manager, wherever the case may be for your jurisdiction, or of course, where you may like to work at. So this presentation should talk about, what the system is, how much it's going to cost, and why it would be beneficial to your department. And in terms of costs, I want you to put together a budget, and this budget should go over like the equipment cost, personnel, any extra safety stuff, and have it itemized and get some legitimate quotes with it. What is the price tag for startup, and then what is your continuing operating cost? So this is going to cost you guys do a little bit of research. Of course, this is a good thing. And then you're also going to have to come up with like an SOP or a procedure, if you will, on the use of said equipment, who, what, when, where, why, purpose and scope of practice. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to look at several broad categories, and we're going to talk a little bit about groups and how they are defined and group dynamics. And we're also going to hit briefly over some key elements of behavior management. And this is important to keep in mind, because when you're sitting for promotional testing, a lot of times they have these assessment centers, and I guarantee you they're going to have, of course, your standard fire attack on maybe an office building or a little McMansion or something big of that nature, which most of the time people do pretty good on because they're kind of used to the routine and flow of that. But their curveball that they're going to throw you is going to be some sort of human resource issue. Because at the Fire Officer 1 and 2 level, that middle management is going to be expected to control and delegate their subordinates. So you're going to have all kind of issues arise that you're going to have to take care of. Whether it be like the scenario of somebody playing pranks at the station, somebody getting hurt, maybe a sexual harassment issue, hazing, whatever the case may be, substance abuse, person being late. You need to start thinking about these things and how you are going to handle it as a supervisor. Objective number 1, define groups. In a group, in the context of this text, is a group of 2 or more people with stated or unstated common goals. Essentially, it is a collection of people who share certain traits, they interact with one another, they accept the rights and obligations as member of the group, and they share some sort of common identity. Now, when we're looking at groups, it's important to know you have formal groups and informal groups. And we'll go a little bit more into it in a second, but, informal groups are more of that friendship bond, where the formal group is more of like members of a fire department or a unit or things of that nature, where they share a common goal, often in the forms of some sort of written document like a mission statement that you see at your organizations. Your Informal groups usually are defined in less formal manners of that, mission statement or ethics or whatever mantra you put forward toward the public. Oftentimes, as I said, those informal groups come up as a subgroup within the formal group. So those are kind of your coworkers. And those are often formed around common interest, and they may have greater influence on productivity and success of the formal group. So this is kind of like, hanging out after duty, camping, fishing, whatever the case may be, and building those, friendship, those informal bonds. Because again, remember, you're working with these people a third of the year, and on your off time, you start developing these common interests and do things together, which kind of strengthens or quite possibly strengthens your formal group. So this can be a positive effect if the members encourage each other and support their activity. Now, when it becomes an issue is when it negatively affects the formal group. So let's say you have this informal group and the goal or underlying mantra is, oh, they're picking on us, or that's a bad regulation or ordinance, or they're filled with that hate and discontent, and then they start stirring up trouble. So that informal group can start affecting the formal group because of their negativity. Now, it's important to know the organization is putting you in charge of a formal group. And you may be a part of that informal group as well. So you have to learn to balance the relationship. And again, looking back at our human resource aspect, hey, we may go fishing and hanging out off duty and be all buddy-buddy, but where the rubber meets the road, you are the boss, and you cannot be expected, or they shouldn't expect you to, look the other way. Oh, hey, yeah, I know I was 30 minutes late and I didn't call, but hey, we're buds. We go fishing together and hang out. It's going to be cool. Well, when you're in charge of that formal group dynamics, you're going to be expected to act accordingly. One promotional assessment center scenario I remember doing, the gist of it was literally that scenario. You've got a guy who's constantly late coming in, or a gal. Hey, we're all buddy, and now you're in charge. What are you going to do? So your group dynamics affect your ability to deal effectively toward that formal and informal group. Okay, how are groups defined? And it's important to remember that a group is often defined as a collection of people who, 1, share certain traits, 2, interact with one another, 3, accept the rights and obligations as member of the group, and finally, share a common identity. Objective number 2, describe the characteristics of group dynamics. The group structure of an emergency response unit is not significantly different from the structures of any other formal or informal group. The group may exhibit the following 5 essential characteristics, and that is common binding interest, group image/identity, a sense of continuity, shared values, and roles within the group. The effects of these elements on the group members are what make up the group dynamics. A study of group dynamics involves recognizing the internal and external pressures that affect these basic elements and learning to deal with those pressures. So let's look at some binding interests. With binding interests, your group members, especially in the fire service, must be drawn together by some common interest that is important to them on some level, such as common hobby, organizational membership, religious affiliation, whatever the case may be. Now, the individual's participation in the group may change as their interests change. So let's say you have somebody that's, real big into hazardous material, and then, they get tired of it or change, and now they want to do more tech rescue. So that's kind of an example of one of those subgroups where they may want to swap from, say, the hazmat station to technical rescue or whatever the case may be. Though you may have those, lifelong people that, hey, they eat, sleep, and breathe, technical rescue. Now, as the officer, you should strive to keep an interest, but recognize that, these changes occur within the group. Now, your binding interest within the fire and emergency group may include such things as a desire to serve the community, a sense of professionalism, maybe a thrill seeker, sense of adventure, running into the burning building, having that affiliation with a high risk, profession like, say, technical rescue or whatever the case may be. Now, the officers managing these groups must determine, communicate, and support these common binding interests. And when I'm talking about supporting these common things, I'm talking about the good things, such as that, service the community, that sense of professionalism, that esprit de corps of your group. Now, lots of the group cohesion can factor into loss of personnel or support for the unit and organization. So in terms of support, maybe you have a fire chief or somebody that supports the group, hey, let's do a dive team, high angle rescue, or whatever the case may be. And that could have it, foster and grow. However, the group may lose some of its cohesion if you, say, have somebody get promoted or somebody quit or resign. That may be an intricate part of that group and the dynamics of that group. Group image or identity. Group members must share group image or identity by recognizing the group's purpose and, of course, take pride in it. Once they have that pride, again, that esprit de corps, it contributes to the group's spirit and high morale, and that must extend beyond the unit to the entire organization. And groups that have this high influence tend to be more productive, higher achievers, as opposed to ones that don't have that group dynamics, that positive self-image. Then they tend to be low producers or, poor production. So officers must not allow this group spirit to evolve into an unhealthy rivalry, however, and know that first, the loyalty is to the organization. So a lot of times what you'll see is within a department, you'll have certain stations or, say, battalions or groups, and they kind of start coming up with, like nicknames or station flags or company flags, like the Fighting 17th or, the Animal House or the Night Train. And they come up with a flag or something, and it kind of builds that whole, group dynamics. And then they start proving themselves, where they're better than the other groups, whether it be on, company drills or whatever the case may be. Um, or, hey, we have the fastest response time and, we get in there and get the job done, whatever the case may be. But again, as an officer, you have to foster that and keep it going, but keep it healthy where it doesn't become some sort of unhealthy rivalry where now you've got your uh, engine crew, hey, let's go by, that other company's house, in terms of the station that is, and do some sort of prank or something while they're out on a call or something of that nature. So group image or identity is very important as long as you're able to control it and have it align and foster with the department in terms of their mission statement. A sense of continuity is very important to your group's integrity. If the group members have doubts about the group's continued existence, then their commitment to the group may diminish. If the members' sense of continuity is disrupted, the group can be fragmented and the members may begin to think and act more independently. Now, as the company officers are concerned with how to maintain their subordinate sense of continuity, even though they are subjected to being transferred to another unit or shift, the company officer must continually remind their subordinates that they are part of a larger group in terms of an organization and try to foster that continuity for, say, that new person coming in, or introduce something, be positive, whatever the case may be, to keep that group dynamic going for a little bit. Now, common values are another important factor. Now, common values are sometimes a composite of the individual perception of reality in terms of responsibility and integrity. These values surface as various subjects are confronted on a day-to-day basis in terms of the normal interaction within the group structure. The values shared by a group can change gradually as the group accepts new members with different values. While individuals within the group may share common values, they are likely to have values that differ. The company officer must recognize and respect these differences as long as they don't have conflict with the values of the organization. The values of the organization also affect group values. So whatever the hierarchy tend to value as important should reflect within these groups in terms of their attitude and actions. So for example, organizational values of fire and emergency service require that the emergency responder must be trustworthy and honest. So as a company officer, you must exemplify and reinforce these organizational values within the unit. Now, let's say within the unit, another example of a trend that may transpire. Let's say you have a new person that comes in, or let's say you have a person that may be suffering on their physical fitness or annual physical agility test. So you may want to tweak and direct the group toward, hey, you know what, we could all use a little extra cardio workout or lose a few pounds or eat healthier, something that may help foster this this belief system so that the overall goals of the organization are met, but the group dynamics are shifting a little bit from, okay, let's have fried food and T-bone steaks for dinner to, hey, let's get a salad and some chicken breast, or whatever the case may be, and let's do, a 30-minute exercise after dinner time so we can help, Bob or whoever, whatever, get in shape, because we could all stand to lose a few pounds, so that makes us a better group. So that's an excellent example how you, as a leader, can kind of direct that group and their dynamics in terms toward completing the organizational mission. Roles within the groups are usually assigned, but leaders may naturally emerge in your informal groups. And you can kind of see this on a day-to-day basis within the fire service. But in our traditional formal groups, you have that assigned leaders such as company officers, lieutenants, drivers, sergeants, whatever the case may be. Now, your company officer should be the formal group leader. The other side of the coin, the informal groups, you're going to notice you'll have natural leaders that are going to surface within this group or entity. So the officer should maintain a relationship with those informal group leaders. You shouldn't ignore them. And maintaining that strong relationship with those informal group leaders can also influence the formal group in terms of using another person within the dynamics to help foster that sense of continuity, that shared vision, and get things done. It helps to maintain that motivation and satisfaction and performance of the large group or team. Though any group member can have a positive influence on the group, but they tend to take cues from, their assigned leader in the formal group or the natural leaders of the informal group. So again, lead by example. And if it's that informal group leader and they have a bad attitude, you need to try to adjust that in some way, shape, or form so this underlying tone of resentment within the organization does not grow and present a problem. The roles of members are important to the function of the group. So there must be an agreement to follow the organizational rules and guidelines. They should have an understanding of informal rules and how those rules fit within the organizational rules. So maybe an example of an informal rule may be the station officer yourself likes everyone to report 30 minutes earlier than their shift change time. So that's saying that, say, shift starts at 7:30. So he wants everyone there by 7 o'clock. So that's an example of one of those informal rules. And in order to ensure that those informal rules are understood and followed, it's as a leader, it's important to tell your subordinates what you expect of them. So some other areas of responsibility in terms of the group members, they need to show mutual respect for one another. They need to be dependable. They need to be operating ethically and be goal oriented. They must be ready to acknowledge the company's officer's authority. Now, this is kind of one of those tricky things, do they respect the rank or do they respect the person or both, in terms of that, respect is earned, not so much given, if you will say. So they have to ensure that the officer will have to exert the authority less often by doing this. The control will result from more of a democratic approach than authoritarian approach. And what we're referring to there is, Democrat basically like, okay, gang, we got to get hydrants done this week. We've got to get pre-plans done. What do you guys, think? What kind of order you want? So as a company officer, that's an example of this whole democratic approach, and you kind of let them kind of dictate how stuff gets done. Of course, more so on an emergency scene, then you have to have that authoritarian approach because there's no time to, take opinions and things of that nature. Now, the members will be able to carry out orders, tasks, and assignments with minimal supervision once you have that in play of knowing the formal and informal rules, and you know that the officer is the officer, and you know how they like things done, and the officer knows how the group operates. So things get done more efficiently and effectively by having that good bond. So that permits the company officer to focus more on the overall operation and coordination of the resources. So by trusting your group and having them understand and know what you want done, then it allows you, the officer, to focus on the bigger picture. Now, the groups as individuals, you as the company officer must understand that the group interaction determines the group members' productivity. When cooperative, group productivity is greater than the sum of an individual effort. So what they're saying here is understand that the group is only as strong as its weakest link, for lack of a better term. And you, as an officer, need to know the individual team members in terms of what they can and can't do and their limitations. So when you're making the assignments, know what your folks can do within that group and don't assign them something that, may be unrealistic or hard for that group to do as opposed to another group or entity. And of course, if you see that being an issue, that's a great time to, again, work on that deficiency in a non-emergency situation. All right, so let's look at applying certain leadership styles. And this may apply to situational leadership styles to the group processes to gain the best results. Now, in terms of group development, there are 5 stages. First is forming, and that has to do with trust and respect develop as the relationship grows within the formal confines of the group. Members begin to see themselves as part of the group. Members become enthusiastic about challenges of a new project or a task. The next phase is storming, which conflict may result as members jockey for that informal leadership or try to exert group influence, because in the fire service we're type A personalities a lot of times, and everybody kind of wants to be in charge and take care of things and get things done. So you may have that informal formation of that informal leader, and you may have some conflict within the group. Now, this does reduce time in terms of the phases with active listening to members and explaining your decision. So as you're having people jockeying positions and trying to exert their authority, again, that will reduce as long as you listen to the members, explain decisions, and kind of guide things. Norming, now the group is established in norms and values that each member accept and adhere to. And then you transition to the performing. So the supervisor maintains team spirit as a group, and they get, accomplish objectives and goals and things of that nature. And then you have adjourning, and that's the final stage, and that's kind of the termination of a group task. So this includes acknowledging the group's accomplishment and participation of individual members, and it's an opportunity to debrief and determine if the process change should be made. Excuse me. So this is kind of looking at like a daily picture or something of that nature, and not necessarily a complete dissolving of the group. Now, to me, the adjourning phase or the debriefing phase is critical in terms of leadership position. It's a great opportunity to learn from what we did and improve. What went right as a group and what went wrong. But it's important not to place blame when doing this critique. Identify the deficiencies and ways to fix it, but don't, throw anybody under the bus. Say, oh, well, we would have got there, 5 minutes sooner if Bob could have got his gear on or something of that nature. So it may be something effective. Hey, well, we were a little slow getting our gear on and getting out of the station. So, what can we do to improve upon this? Now, it is important to note that not all groups go through each of these processes at the same rate of time, so some may take longer to move through the process than others. However, the process should not be allowed to go on any longer than necessary. So when you're doing these non-emergent tasks or informal things, hey, at the end of the day, we've got to get the job done. Okay, so let's recap. What were the 5 essential characteristics of group dynamics? And that was the common binding and interest, group identity, sense of continuity, shared values, and roles within the group. Learning objective number 3, identify elements of behavior management as they relate to the company officer. Behavior management is one of the most important skills for an officer to acquire and maintain. While group members may respond to peer pressure, the company officer cannot shirk responsibility and depending on peer pressure to correct disruptive behavior. The company officer may still need to privately counsel a disruptive subordinate. Company officers who fail to control disruptive behavior will lose the respect of the other unit members. Behavioral management begins with prevention of disruptive behavior. Prevention requires the officer to communicate behavioral expectations based on the organization's policy and provide a positive example and create a positive atmosphere in the unit. The company officer should review the organizational policies to identify the specific policy or procedure that was violated and the policy that describes how violations should be handled. The company officer should also review the labor management agreement, if applicable, to determine the appropriate steps mandated in terms of discipline. Now, company officers must be familiar with ways to assist the subordinates. First being counseling. And that should start with a private session between the company officer and the new members of the unit. The officer states expectations positively and the behavioral limitations. Now, it may also be used for such things as discipline or to determine causes of inappropriate behavior. And this is a way to establish means of correcting behavior. So that's just kind of a brief overview of counseling. Now, coaching the company officer or some sort of designated subordinate, like say, hey, Bob, you're the driver or relief driver. I want you to take the new rookie under your wing and kind of help them out. So coaching basically guides an individual through new activities. And this allows reinforcement of correct behaviors or redirect incorrect behaviors. Providing peer assistance begins by assigning more experienced members to work with that new member. Finally, you have mentoring, which supervisors or other supervisors act as an advisor or a guide to that member. So that can be in terms of maybe a new officer or something of that nature getting promoted and having somebody that's been in that role before kind of help guide them, if you will. Now, an important thing to look at on page 378 is the employee rights legislation. In several states, such as California, they have a firefighter bill of rights, which has fundamentally changed the first level supervisor responsibilities and authorities. Company officers should also be conversant with state statutes concerning employees' rights relating to discipline. So you may have some sort of union rule or something of that nature, depending on where you work, or maybe a merit system that entitles employees to certain rights or policies or things of that nature. So when it comes to counseling, coaching, peer assessment, things of that nature. So as a company officer, it's up to you to be familiar with whatever these other AHJs that come into play. Now, I'm a firm believer that it's always a good idea to review with everybody the policies with everybody at any given time, so this can help address behavior management issues that arise over time. Now, this should include review of your organizational policies and your organizational rules, regulations, and your own personal expectations with your subordinates. Now, this generally should include, but are not limited to, such policies that address safety, attendance, absenteeism, tardiness, and expectations and regulations for responding to emergencies, things like that nature, storage and care of PPE, station facilities, apparatus and equipment care, cleaning and maintenance, company level training, physical fitness programs, grooming, procedures for visitors or citizen inquiries at the station, and response procedures for volunteers and privately owned vehicles, things of that nature. So by reviewing these various policies and procedures with everybody, then you as a company officer are ensuring that, hey, this has been covered. It kind of reinforces to them what's to be expected, and it, makes everyone aware, so they can't say, oh, well, I didn't know about the attendance policy. Well, yes, Bob, I show you were on duty here on the 12th. Here's your sign-in sheet for our training log, where the topic was we discussed, attendance and tardiness. So again, that's a good way just to get everything out there, make sure everybody knows it, and it's a way to help hold folks accountable for their actions. And if they're aware of the policy and procedure and it gets brought up to them on a regular basis, then they're more apt to follow it and not do freelancing or deviate from it for whatever reason. Counseling is designed to help individuals adjust to a situation. Now, counseling varies, or there's a variety of procedures designed to help individuals adjust to certain situations. It can be a means of either reinforcing correct behavior or eliminating improper behavior. It involves resolving behavior issues through actions such as providing advice, recommending career path and choices, providing professional development opportunities. The company officer must not act as a therapist for psychological or emotional problems. They should seek advice of superior officers and or the organization's employee assistance program if these situations arise. So maybe you have someone that maybe going through a divorce, or they had a rough call and they're having trouble dealing with that. So you need to be able to know what resources are out there and get them to the appropriate thing so they can be back to being a fully productive and happy employee. So learn and practice appropriate counseling and positive reinforcement methods that simulate and motivate subordinates to perform properly. Now, organizations have formalized process to follow when documenting behavioral issues, so you need to be abreast of what these are. And they may come with counseling forms or consulting with superiors, having another person in the room, whatever the case may be. So when you're looking at the guidelines, meet and talk with the subordinate in private. These are all just, kind of general rules. List the exact facts of what the behavior individual is displaying. State the behavioral objectives that clearly and concisely communicate what is expected of the individual. Hey, this is what I want. This is what you're doing. This is not good. And then what can we do to correct these issues? So discuss and agree on a solution with that individual. Explain to them what actions will be taken if the individual does not comply with the objectives or solutions you guys have come up with. And this is very, very, very important. Give copies of documentation. Documentation is the key here to individuals, and retain the originals to make sure they stay in your jacket. If you don't document the incident, you have nothing to stand on later on in terms of holding that employee accountable. Of course, you probably have some sort of policy or procedure in terms of documenting, so make sure you follow it. Now, if it's a legal or an ethical issue, it may require the company officer to have some sort of supervising authority before administering the counseling. Maybe they need to have a union rep or labor management or HR, wherever the case may be. Now, when the informal attempts to correct behavior are unsuccessful, the company officer should review the disciplinary policy. When discipline is necessary, again, documentation is critical in supporting the formal action. Company officers who show sincere interest in subordinates do more towards solving the problem than any other action. So don't be quick to jump to discipline, unless it warrants, but do figure out what the problem is and how to fix it, because that should be the overall objective of the session. Of course, have positive reinforcement with the situation, have constructive feedback, and of course, motivation. All right, so on to coaching. Now, coaching is the process of directing individual skills and performance. For company officers, the process of giving coaching basically is motivating corrections, positive reinforcement, and constructive feedback. And the purpose is to aid the subordinate in maintaining and improving their performance. And that's the 4-step coaching model. It's important to remember that feedback needs to be positive, immediate, direct, and frequent. Now, the 4-step coaching model describes current performance level, describes the desired performance level, gain commitment for change, and follow-up commitment. Now, this can take place in a group or individual settings. The company officer should identify the problem source through observation and questions, and it should guide the subordinate to an appropriate solution. Be able to recognize and constructively criticize and carefully correct flaws in your subordinate's action. Effective praise and positive reinforcement actions when they're performed appropriately. And you need to strike a balance between correcting what is performed wrong and praising what is performed right. So don't, browbeat every time, or, don't give praise. Oh, you tied your shoes, great, because then it kind of loses some of its teeth. Using peer assistance can also be a great tool, and this can clarify expectations to the subordinates. It may be intimidating to perform in front of the officer in terms of a skill or something of that nature. So by having one of their peers that you trust watch them and critique them, then that can make them feel more comfortable and, again, accomplish the overall goal. Now, this can be provided by more experienced, mature unit personnel. And again, you need to make sure that they have the specialized knowledge and skills and can provide training in that area. It can be used as a basis for a buddy system that pairs that experienced member with new employees during their probationary period. And that kind of goes into that whole mentoring aspect. But it's important to whoever you put in charge that peer assistance, make sure that you trust them and they're not just going to be buddy with them and pencil whip whatever you want them to do. Now, mentoring places the subordinate under the guidance of a more experienced professional, who then in turn acts as a tutor, a guide, and a motivator. Usually, someone other than the instructor who guides the subordinate's actions and real experience, and the real experience job is going to be your mentor. Now, they must be carefully chosen and selected for their experience, interest, patience, and communication abilities. We all know certain people that have that certain knack, if you will, that love taking time and explaining stuff and working with new people. You just have them. And then you have those other people that are a little rough around the edges and may not have the patience or the desire to be an effective mentor. So personnel can mentor by providing role models for personnel, providing guidance in career planning, assisting getting that specialized training, identifying outside resources, suggesting opportunities for challenging work assignments, and monitoring the personnel achievement. And by having them do this, it takes the load off of your back as a company officer, where you just kind of have to check in and monitor, as opposed to being hands-on with it and taking on the responsibility yourself. Now, this is good in the sense that, again, it allows you to work on the bigger picture, and two, the person you're mentoring, it gives them a sense of purpose and allows them to improve their skills and start working on advancement, because now they're taking that step forward. Now, company officers should actively engage in personnel evaluation programs, and I'm a firm believer in the fire service that we do a piss poor job preparing folks to do evaluations on other individuals. Now, personnel might be formally evaluated during a probationary period annually, for promotional purposes or for disciplinary or non-disciplinary purposes. The schedule should not deter the company officer from providing ongoing feedback in between these evaluations. Now, they may be provided quarterly or annually based to allow individuals to alter or improve performance for their annual evaluation. So, you've got those informal check marks. Hey, we're halfway through the year. This is what I've noticed. And these are your, strengths, weaknesses, and ways you can improve. So, again, this kind of helps you stay ahead of the curve for that annual, yearly evaluation. So, start developing that good documentation habits so you have something to write at the end of the year as opposed to just meet standards. Now, when you're doing evaluations, this is one of the hardest points because you have to detach yourself from that, group dynamics, going from, buddy to boss, if you will, and be as objective as possible. And you should give as much information as can be gathered and documented. Now, it's important to note that this could have a career-long effect on the subordinates if mishandled. This can result in loss of motivation, personal resentment, tarnishing of their career or their reputation. So it's a balancing act, if you will. You want to do it right, but you don't want to, in my opinion, make it so bad without some way of correcting it. So the advantage of this essentially is forming a systematic procedure for appraising the employee's ability and accomplishment within the organization. And the benefits of a well-organized program is a way to have a permanent record of their strengths and weaknesses, so they can be awarded when the time comes, promotions, transfers, discipline, and termination. And it's important to note, and I hate to harp on termination or discipline, but too many times we have this whole let's do an informal counseling on somebody that's doing crappy stuff, and then they keep doing crappy stuff, and when that year rolls around, I'm totally clueless on my crappy performance, even though you've been telling them for a year. So you need to document this and have it signed off on so you have a paper trail to warrant a termination. Sometimes, I hate to say it, we're all buddy-buddy in the fire service, so to speak, and brotherhood and camaraderie, but at some point, you've got to draw the line, and you have to have loyalty to the organization and the profession as a whole. And certain people just, don't need to be here. So the only way to get rid of them, if you will, correctly, is to have a good paper trail. Now, by having these evaluations, the company officer becomes more familiar with their personnel being evaluated, which allows for more effective use of the personnel and better success within the system. So if you evaluate them regularly, hey, this is what they can do or can't do, and I can, use it as a tool to help them move up. It can be motivation for the person being evaluated. Hey, you're doing great. I'm going to start tasking you with some other duties. This also allows upper management be more aware of the lower level manager, supervisors, and ability in terms of what's going on and what they're doing. This identifies the specific talent of the individual that can be used in other areas of the organization. And it improves efficiency of the employees and organizations as a whole. So when you're evaluating personnel, you must have certain specific characteristics that you go over. First and foremost, timely. Conduct evaluations linked to specific incidences of unsatisfactory performance or inappropriate behavior as soon as possible. They should be stated clearly. State the goals and objectives clearly and concisely. It should be non-discriminatory. Apply the job performance standard regardless of such things as gender, race, ethnicity, age, or any other sub-classification. Should be consistent. Apply job performance standards equally throughout the organization. Document it. Maintain thorough records of each evaluation in the employee's personnel file. Provide copies to employee, but maintain them confidentiality as a whole. should be conducted by trained supervisors. Train company officers to perform personal evaluations properly. Objective is to overcome personal bias and base evaluations on established criteria. Now, most organizations have a personal evaluation process in place, and we're just going to kind of hit some of the higher points overall. So, organization expectations should be established during the initial meeting between the company officer and the subordinates. Pre-established job descriptions can be used to describe the employee's duties and responsibilities. So it never hurts. Pull out the job description for the job that they're doing. And HR departments or personnel departments should have a copy of them. And as a company officer, you should understand, or you should ensure that your subordinates understand and perform the standards upon which they'll be evaluated. You should have an opportunity to reinforce positive performance or to generate change in employees' behavior in order to meet the organizational expectations. And accomplished change usually involves focusing on the positive accomplishment of the employee, involving the employee in setting goals and objectives, and creating an atmosphere in which the employee can feel challenged and respected. It does provide basis for performing evaluations during probationary period, and typically recurrent after the probationary period. This allows the company officer and employee to review work quality and establish performance goals and objectives. Now, this should include continuous feedback to the employee through your informal evaluation process and actions to ensure successful evaluations. Actions to ensure successful evaluation should ensure the employee is aware of their roles and responsibilities and relationships. And this allows the employee to contribute to the overall setting or altering performance goals. So as you can kind of see here, it's a lovely big wheel, okay? You have the probationary period, you have your evaluations, you give feedback, then you do informal evaluations, get feedback, and then have your formal evaluation. So at each facet, this is not the first time that they hear good or bad things. Then, of course, you critique as long as they go. And as a company officer, even though it's an informal evaluation, it's probably a good idea to start jotting notes down when you have them. So again, when you get to that annual evaluation, you've got some stuff written down with specific instances and things, good or bad, to justify those really high marks or really low marks on that annual evaluation. And that way, there's also no surprise to the employee when they receive good or bad marks because, hey, we've been kind of talking about this throughout the entire year. Now, with this, there are certain legal considerations you've got to keep in mind. So, you must adhere to the guidelines that state or authority having jurisdiction or provenance or federal government provides. The company officer must be familiar with all statutory requirements relevant to personnel evaluations. Factors emphasized in recent court decisions in terms of evaluation must be as follows. Be significantly related to assigned work behavior or skills. Individuals cannot be judged on tasks not assigned or trained to perform. Include definitive identifiable criteria based on the quality or quantity of work or on specific performance supported by documentation records. They need to be objective and not based on subjective observations. So this one, again, you need to have clear goals assigned, something that is measurable and not more of an opinion. So, for example, it's like, okay, I want you to get your gear on in 2 minutes. Okay, and breathing air and all the particulars. So you have it all laid out, and then you document it and you time it. So here's the standard, here's what I want you to do, and you didn't do it. So it's very objective, hard to argue with. And of course, it has to be supported by documentation. So here's this nice crucial wheel we keep going over on documentation. Make sure they know the job, look at the task, what's to be expected, and of course, identifying deficiencies and ensuring that they know about it and they're trained on it and given an opportunity to perform. So you can see how the paper trail really comes into play, so you're not getting yourself in legal hot water. Now, company officers must be aware of the requirements mandated by any labor management agreement, and that's more up north in the southeast. But this should have control of the evaluation process, requirements, and certain actions by company officers, and establish specific timeframes for said purpose. But again, wherever you work, make sure you're familiar with the policies and procedures. And again, I think as an agency or organization as a whole, many people do a piss poor job getting people ready for this human resource aspect of management at the company officer level. So extra training is definitely needed, as well as some self-study to make sure that you dot your I's, cross your T's, and follow the rules. Now, another thing you need to be aware of is possible grievance procedures, which are used when an employee perceives they have been treated unfairly. A lot of departments have a grievance process, and this is often filed when the employee perceives they have been unfairly treated. So if this happens, again, you need to have your documentation in hand and ready to go. But this usually is included in some sort of labor management agreement or some sort of organizational policy and procedure manual. So again, look at your department's regulations in regards to this. Now, it needs to be effective, consistent, and provide an equitable resolution to the problem. Now, they all generally contain some general elements, and it would behoove you to remember these, such as a filing period, testimony, witness statements, representations, and a review of steps. Okay, let's talk about discipline. Discipline can be used as a mean to correct an employee's behavior. So, a corrective measure used to get employees to meet standards and adhere to policies. This should be taken in a manner that is corrective, progressive, and lawful. It should be designed to educate and train, correct the inappropriate behavior, provide positive motivation, ensure compliance with established policies, rules, regulations, standards, or procedures. It should also provide direction for the employee. When we're looking at discipline, there are different types. You have positive, which is constructive, resulting when reasonable rules of conduct are established and fairly and consistently applied, or negative, which involves more of a corrective action when employees disobey established rules or performance requirements. Now, this includes corrections of inappropriate behavior by the company officer as well, such as minor violations promptly do what the organization requires in terms of corrective behavior, or more serious violations which continues the process up the chain of command. Now, employees are entitled to a written notice of proposed action. Reasons for the proposed action, copies of any charges and material upon which the action is based, and the right to respond to authorities initially imposing the discipline. Once the requirements are met, the discipline should be imposed without hearing unless the employee requests. If the hearing is held, it is intended to be informal rather than adversarial, meaning it's a fact-finding as opposed to more of a throwing darts at one another. The employee or designated representative may provide information and respond to specific charges. Now, progressive discipline should be adhered to, and this usually starts with training and or education and may be used to correct first instant employee fails to meet the former standard or violation rules of conduct, and then a progression to a more punitive measure for additional offenses. Now, it is important to note that sufficiently serious first offenses may result in termination and can help ensure that punitive discipline is seldom used. So when we're looking at the levels here, first you have more of an oral reprimand, which is an attempt to correct inappropriate behavior as soon as discovered. Now, this should prevent behavior from becoming a pattern or progressing to more serious offenses. And it should start with that individual counseling so that the employee understands which rule was violated and the organizational necessity for the rule. It should also explain expectations for the employee in the future and when and what may happen when another violation occurs. Now, the next corrective action would be more of a written reprimand. And this is applied when the employee repeats a violation for which the preventive action was taken or commits a different violation. Now, this may be used if the employee commits a serious violation as the first offense. So this is kind of like that 3-strike policy. However, depending on the grievancy of the infraction, you may jump straight to written again or more of a termination kind of thing. Now, a punitive action is used when the employee continues to exhibit that inappropriate behavior despite the earlier corrective measures. Efforts or comments vary in terms of that serious first offense, as I said. Now, the employee should be notified that the behavior cannot and will not be tolerated, and it may include the formal written reprimand, suspension, demotion, termination, or even prosecution, depending on what it is, when you get to that whole punitive action phase. In some cases, the steps listed here may not be followed due to the severity of the action. Termination may happen without suspension or demotion. Now, the company officer must often responsible for the preventative action. Administrative responsibility for corrective and punitive action usually comes from higher up. So again, the company officer, you're more, let's prevent this, let's direct it, let's nip it in the bud. But once it happens and you're going up the chain, then, labor or administration or both need to get involved at this point. Okay, review question. What are the common methods of behavioral management? And that is counseling, coaching, providing peer assistance, and mentoring. Learning objective number 4. Explain the role of professional development in the fire and emergency service organization. Professional development. A key to growth, not only for the employee, but in helping the organization develop future leaders within the organization's succession plan. And unfortunately, I think a lot of organizations don't do a good job in regards to succession planning. So this is something that really needs to be addressed as a company officer and an organization as a whole. So basically what you need to do is prepare employees to take the reins of that next role, if you will, in the career ladder. So this prepares the employee by improving the skills in the current position. It prepares them to future promotional opportunity. In order to do this, however, you must know your employee's career goals. Now, you should have some training divisions or individuals within a training division that will require input for certain things as, scheduling or delivering courses, determining funding necessary for courses, and things of that nature. So your professional development plans should be examples of training and, again, professional development within the organization. And this can be things such as job shadowing, and I'm a big opponent of job shadowing. So if you've got 4 people on an engine and you want to, train your driver to start riding seat and acting up, why not let them ride seat and maybe you drive, or you ride backwards and let somebody else be relief driver? That way somebody is getting time in that position to help learn the job while still having someone over their shoulder just kind of critique and help them out along the way. And this can be, in any kind of organization, whether it be volunteer or paid. When you're looking at any professional development planning process, it will outline the current situation and provide objectives. So it's a plan, it's a roadmap. Hey, this is where you're at now. In 6 months, I want you to do this, and this should prepare you by our final goal to do X, Y, Z. So whatever the task or the job is, put a plan to it and give them goals and objectives and things to do to meet that goal, and certain benchmarks, and of course praise and reward along the way. Now, we don't want to put the cart before the horse, but employees must be proficient in their current position before advancing to that next position or rank, because you're looking at changes in knowledge and skills, and abilities may be required for change in organizational provided services, new technology, or additional responsibilities. Officers should be familiar with each assigned personnel's career goals. Assist in maintaining and expanding the knowledge, skills, and abilities of those individuals. So when we're looking at the steps, they should evaluate the subordinate's current knowledge, skills, and abilities, compare the results of each evaluation, and determine if the knowledge, skills, or abilities should be improved. Determine new knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to achieve their career goal. Advise the subordinate of improvements and additions needed to achieve career goals, and suggested sources for training and educational needs. And again, develop the schedule for completing of stated goals. Some things to consider. The subordinate may have existing skills that are best used in another job within the department. So you may want to discuss a duty change and provide subordinates with the information to make an informed decision. So for example, let's say you have an employee that just really excels and has a great eye for detail and figuring things out and investigating. So maybe you want to try to gear them towards something in the fire marshal's office in terms of investigations and or inspections. So company officers should also assist subordinates in preparing for promotion in terms of know the job and promotional requirements that they're going for. Emphasize the importance of studying for the promotion in terms of the material. Encourage subordinates to take advantage of study groups or practice assessments, and follow established professional development plan. And I'm sure you've all experienced someone in your career, whether it be in fire service or another entity, where, yeah, that supervisor wants to see you succeed. So maybe they'll adjust the training to help focus that individual get ready, or more individuals get ready for maybe a driving test, officer test, wherever the case may be. Summary. Company officers should understand the definition of a group as well as the characteristics of group dynamics. Officers should also know the steps for evaluating and disciplining employees. Effective personnel evaluations will reduce the need for corrective discipline. Okay, gang, so we covered a lot. Make sure you go ahead and do the review questions. And again, if you have any questions, you can email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu, or you can give me a call in the office. So until next time, be safe and have a wonderful day.